Hello and welcome to this presentation on the science behind GP gains. Because this is a long topic and I estimate it's probably going to take quite a while to discuss, I'm going to split it into two videos. The first video on this is going to discuss the current theories out there. It's going to disprove the current theories by giving you an intuition and a bit of a new concept as to how you can actually yourself observe GP gains to work, and you can do your own research to confirm all of the theories and concepts that I'm going to give you. So if we get started, we can start by sort of looking what the current theories are out there. So the current theory that I've seen, that there's a few of them, and I'm going to go through each one of them. Current theory is that the GP of a horse, not the GP gain, the GP of a horse is going to be equal to the parent's average GP, so whatever the combined parent's GP divided by 2, that will give you the average, and that's it. That's all you've got. That's going to be the GP of the foal. So we're essentially saying is if you've got parent A with a GP of 500, parent B with a GP of 500. The average GP is going to be 500, and that's going to be the GP of the foal. That is what that formula is implying. And before you think, all right, that's how it works. No, not at all. Hold it right there, Sonny Jim and various lasses out there listening to this. It is entirely incorrect. No, because what we can observe is that foals will gain a GP. They will always have a GP better than their parents, except in one case that I've covered in a different video where the GP stays the same. So essentially, this is incorrect. So some other people may come along and they may say, okay, the GP of the foal is going to be the parent's average GP plus 1.2. Now I'm going to discuss how this came about, and I'm also then going to go through why it's incorrect. So I believe this came about because at some point in around 2012, might have been 2011, doesn't really matter. They changed the game so that instead of the foal earning its GP through the foal games, so instead of the parents, passing on a higher GP, the foal had to earn its own GP through correctly done foal games. Now this changed. And to explain the change, what I assume is that the administrators knew that everyone was very comfortable with the figure 1.2. Everybody knew it. It was in everybody's head. So I think to explain that the gains were now automatic at birth, I think they used this 1.2 and basically said the 1.2 is given automatically at birth. Now I think people took this to mean that the GP gain is going to be an automatic 1.2 GP gain no matter what. And unfortunately that's not true. If we actually go on any server really, if we go on any server and you breed two fully blopped foundations together, two 350 GP horses, and you breed them together. If you do this on international and they're 100 blop each, you will get a foal of around, give or take a little bit, 385 GP. Now that's on international. If you do this on the UK, the Australian, the US, or the Canadian server, you will probably get a foal that is more or less, as I said, give or take, 365 GP. And this is, I'm just going to put regional reg for regional here, because those are all regional servers. Now we can notice here that the difference between 350, or the average of the parents being 350, and the foal we get, it's a lot more than 1.2. On the international server, this is a 35 GP gain, and on the regionals, this is a 15 GP gain. This blows 1.2 right out of the water. So we can safely say that the GP gain is not the parent's average GP plus 1.2. We can forget that. And I'm going to leave this formula here because it just gets worse from here on in. So the next theory that is proposed is that it is also on top of this plus or minus 4%. 4%. Okay, so we're going to need a bit more screen space to deal with this one, so I'm just going to... Oh, I can't move up there, can't move down there. Alright, I'm stuck here, I'm just going to have to remove it all and start again. So, what we're saying was parents' average GP plus 1.2 plus or minus 4%. Okay, so let's use some more example GPs here. Let's say that the average GP of two horses is 998.8. Both parents have this GP. Now the reason I chose that number is because initially if you add 1.2 to it, then we can say, okay, what's 1.2 plus 998? Well, it's equal to 1,000. So there's an easy number to work with. So what is 4% of 1,000? Well, it's 40. So we're basically getting a final number of 1,040. Okay, fair enough. We're saying that if you've got two parents with this GP, they're going to have a foal that could be up to this high. That's all good and well. It's a nice big GP gain, but is it correct? Let's look at another GP. Let's look at 1,998.8 plus 1.2 equals 2,000. So what's 4% of that? That is going to be 2,080. So if we have a look at what's happening here, the higher the parent's GP, the higher the possibility for a GP gain, or the higher the GP gain could be. So there is a problem with this. And the problem with this is something that I'm going to represent with a graph, my absolute favorite thing to do. So we've got a graph here. Now on this graph, I'm going to say that this axis is GP. And I'm going to use international as an example here because a lot of players will play on international. Now the top GP on international, let's round it. Let's round it down a little bit to 4,000. 4,000 GP. And down here, let's put 0 GP. Right at the origin, right there. 0 GP. And this is all GP. On this axis, let's put GP gain. GP gain. So we're basically saying that at here is no GP gain. No GP gain at all. It's no GP gain. And then up here, let's just say, I don't know, 35. 35, that's a pretty high GP gain on international. Alright, so let's go with that, 35 GP gain. Alright, and that means that around here you would have about a 17 GP gain, and then around here you would have more or less about an 8.5 GP gain, and up here you would probably have a, I don't know, something like a 20, 25 GP gain, that sort of thing. And then over here, you would have 2,000, 3,000, 1,000, and over here you would have 350. Alright, now that we've populated our very messy graph here, let's think about some things for a moment. Now, this is something that you can look at yourself, so I'm not pulling these out of thin air because this is research that I've done, and you can do your own research to confirm this. Now, if we go on international and we look in the non-inbred thread, we will hopefully find some 350 GP horses or thereabouts that were born recently. And if we find 350 GP horses that were born recently and they were 100 blop, they will have foals that could be around a 385 GP, which is a 35 GP gain. This is why I put 35 here, because I've seen this happen. And this happened at 350 GP. So I'm going to put a little dot on the graph here. Now, so I went and had a look at some 1,000 GP horses, and again, you can do this yourself and see if you can find, if you're going to look for them yourself, I would look for some unicorn teams, for some obscure unicorn breeds, because they're the ones that at 1,000 GP will still have bred relatively recently at 100 blop, so that's if you want to look for it yourself. So at 1,000 GP, you're probably wondering, well, okay, what kind of things did you see at 1,000 GP? Well, at 1,000 GP, the average GP gain that I saw was around 22, 23 GP gain, which would be around here. Okay, and I think I saw a 24, so I think I'll just sort of extend that to there. Okay, so we've got 2,000 GP. What did I see at 2,000 GP? Well, at 2,000 GP, in fact, the average GP gain that I saw was around 15, or 15 and a half, roughly around there. So that would be there on the graph. 15 GP, 2,000 GP. So, At 3000 GP, what did I see at 3000 GP? At 3000 GP, I found there's plenty of breeding teams at 3000 GP. Hard to find ones that blow up to 100, however, the gains that I saw at 3000 GP were roughly 7 or thereabouts. A couple of 6s. That didn't go that much over 7 or 8, but so we'll just say roughly 7. So we'll put that down here. And at 4000 GP, now the top teams, when they were at 4000 GP, and I'm going to pretend that they're still at only 4000 GP, okay? So at 4000 GP, when they got to 4000 GP, and this is roughly when I did the research anyway, they had gains of about 0.05, roughly 0.06. It was very, very low, and that's very, very close to 0, so I'm going to put that right there. So let's look at what we've got here. We've actually got a line. If it wasn't perfectly visible to you, we've got a line. We can connect the dots and we can see a line. So with this line, we can basically say, well, okay, between 1000 and 2000 GP, if we looked at lots of horses at these GPs and got the average GP, which I did, I looked at about 10 different pairs of parents at each one of these GPs to get these averages. You can see that at 1500 GP, which would be right here, you could say, alright, well, in theory, if we follow the line up, they should have gains of around 19, that kind of 19 or 20, that sort of figure right there. And we can do this for any GP. We can essentially say, okay, at 2500 GP, they're going to have gains of around 11 or something around there. We can do this for 500 GP, etc, etc, etc. So essentially what we can see is that there is a pattern here. The lower the GP you have, the higher the GP gains you get. The higher the GP you have, the lower the GP gains you get. It's quite intuitive, and there's a very, very easy line. It's got a slope of, well, 1, really. The slope on this, the magnitude of the slope of this graph, if you know any linear graphing functions, would be 1. Or the magnitude of it would be 1 at least. So essentially we're saying that, well, look, okay, for every 1 unit, we're going down 1 unit, or however you want to view it. It's a very easy graph. So you're probably wondering, well, look, I had a foundation once. I had a couple of foundations. I bred them together, and I got a 385. I got a 381, a 379, a 387. Lots of different ones. Now, that would be the random variance in GP gains, and I will discuss that in the next video. So essentially that does happen. So what you have to do is you have to do lots of tests, have lots and lots and lots of foals if you're going to do this yourself, or look for lots and lots of foals so you can get the average of these values. And the more horses that you look at, the better and more accurate the average value that you are going to get. And I made sure that the data I collected was of good averages, and of course I collected it over a few days, and there will always be biases because I cannot entirely be sure that the horses were at 100 blup when they had particular foals, and it is difficult, but this gives you a very rough idea, and some of these values may be a little bit off, I understand that, but it does give you a rough idea, more or less. It's more accurate than some of the other formulas you may have seen. So let's sort of think about this, and then remembering this graph. So remember what this graph looks like. It is literally just that, where this is high GP and that's high GP gains, and this is 0 for each case. That's what it looks like. It's a triangle. It is almost a isosceles triangle, but that's not the point. We're getting a bit carried away here. So essentially, if we get rid of this screen and we go back to the formulas, and we say the parent's average GP plus 1.2 plus or minus 4%. So essentially, what is this saying if we revisit this? This is basically saying the average of the parent's GP plus 1.2 plus or minus 4%. So essentially this means that it could be 4% taken off of whatever this value is, but you can't take too much off it because remember, since the changes, you can't have negative GP gains anymore. So if you have a horse or 2 horses with 1000 GP, you cannot go less than that. Cannot do it. It will have to be 1000 GP or more. So essentially what this plus or minus 4% would imply is that you can sort of take a little bit off that 1.2. And that would, technically apply at some of the higher GPs. But this formula is still very incorrect because it doesn't actually help you work out the GP gains at all. It doesn't help you paint the graph that we just created. Essentially, as I said before, at 1,000 GP, more or less, your 4% of 1,000 is 1,040. And if you've got 2,000 GP, then 4% of that is 2,080. So in each case, you've got an 80 GP gain and a 40 GP gain. So we can see that as the GP goes up, that the gains go up as well. And if we actually represent this on the exact same type of graph, where you've got high GP here and low GP gains there, and etc., etc. Basically, what this graph is saying is that the higher the GP, the higher the gains. So it would look like that. So at low GP, according to this formula, you would get, low GP gains. If you had a horse that had 0 GP, which thanks to the negative GP project you would, technically, according to this formula, you wouldn't really get much of a GP gain because, you'd get almost nothing. You might get a little bit, but really not very much at all. Whereas at 4,000, you would be getting, possibly a 160 GP gain, and I can assure you that if that was the case, the top GP would be a lot more than 4,000. So we can sort of say, look, this is not correct. Not correct at all. It's complete balderdash, as some would say. So let's get rid of this percent symbol. And this here now represents another formula that I have seen. The average GP of the parents plus 1.2 plus or minus 4 GP. So again, we can sort of look at this and say, well, what's the minimum and maximum values that this would really give in mathematically? Now, if we use our 1,000 GP thing again, we can say, look, 1,000 GP. Now, you can't go lower than that, so what's the maximum GP value this formula could give? Well, plus 1.2 plus 4, that would give you 1,005.2. Now, at 1,000 GP, maybe that doesn't look so weird to you, but if we use 350 GP, now remember on international you can get plus 35 gains, on the regionals you can get plus 15, give or take in each case. Now, if we look at the 350, what's this formula when applied to parents' average GPs of 350? Well, it would be 355.2. Now we know we can get a lot better than this. This formula does not do the game justice. It does not really tell you how high the GP can go, and it doesn't help you at all. It's a static, rigid, unfriendly formula. It's not very nice. So there are some other formulas that are variations on this, where it's got a 1.2 in there somewhere, but they do their and it's worth saying before I go further is people say this is the random variance, or if this was a percent, they say that's the random variance. But it's not very helpful. I mean, technically, if you go with the percent thing, you could represent a lot of numbers with this formula, but it doesn't help you sort of approximate what kind of number that you're going to get. If we go back to the graph that I did, at least this sort of helps you. You can kind of go up here and say, all right, well, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that, and it helps approximate things for you. However, the other formulas don't. And I think that's going to conclude the first part of this video, and I'm just going to give a slight recap of what we've sort of discussed. I know sometimes I may speak a little bit fast, get a bit carried away, so I'm just going to sort of dot point out what we've learned. So we've defined what GP gains are, more or less. We know that GP gains are the difference in GP between a foal and the average GP of its parents. We know what average GP is. I solemnly hope, or this video may have been a bit confusing. We know what some of the current theories are. We know that there are theories about 1.2, 4%. We know these theories. We're familiar with them, and you might see them on the forums sometimes. And if you see them on the forums, I urge you to question them. Whether or not you know a better formula doesn't matter. At least question them, because people need to start questioning this stuff and not blindly accepting it. And then the last thing that we've sort of had an intuition on is how GP gains can be observed. You can observe them yourself. You can have a look at different GPs with the similar blops and say, well, look, okay, if these horses were born in a similar time frame, then, you know, what's the difference in their gain? And you can do this for a lot of horses. Now, the reason I say born at the same time or born within the same time span, the reason I say that is if you remember back to when I used the regional server and I used international as an example, I said that the regional servers on foundations you get plus 15 GP gains and on international you get plus 35. Now on the regionals they're all very similar because they all have a very similar top GP of around 1,800. And international has a top GP of around 4,000. When I say top GP, I mean the best GP in the game. Whatever the best in the game is at that current time. And I sort of round things a bit just to give you a bit of an idea. So, what is the pattern here? Well, if we look here, the lower top GP gain, and a lower top GP, and then there's a lower gain for everyone else. A higher top GP, there's a higher gain for everyone else. So you can sort of see a pattern here already, and I will cover this in the next video. And that sort of shows that as this thing goes up, so will this. So essentially it means that if people with these higher GPs are not disadvantaging everyone else because everyone else can take advantage of this. So as this goes up, that goes up. And it's sort of that's a relationship between these two things. And in the next video, I will propose that the top GP has everything to do with the GP gain graph. Now, if we remember that graph, it looked something like that. Nice little triangle here with or without a smiley face in it. And I basically say that it all depends on the top GP. Wherever this line is, or however far up or however far down it is, depends on this top GP. And I will cover this in the next video. I hope this was somewhat informative. If not, maybe it was a little bit confusing. Maybe it'll get better in the next video. I doubt it, but I suppose I've given it my best. Feel free to rewatch it, and I'll see you in the next video.